This is where we must stop, for beyond is the work of madness.
Death! Hey guys, what's up? It's Biscuit Horror Reviews, here with a top 15-ish list for you. Essentially, my top 15 favorite Hixploitation films. Now, Hixploitation films can come in many shapes and sizes. In the case of Herschel Gordon Lewis's Moonshine Mountain, that movie is like a comedy musical. But since my forte is horror movies, most of the Hixploitation films that I've seen that I like are horror films. So this is going to be a list of my 15 favorite Hixploitation films, and they're all going to be horror films. Either way. Criteria is that it has to be a Hixploitation film of some way, whether it be about, crazy hillbillies, or just people, or, a horror film set in a rural area, or in the South. As long as it technically is a Hixploitation film, it can make it onto the list. That being said, let's just get this thing going.
For Mary, it was only the beginning. For Christine, it was already too late. For Dolly, the worst was yet to come. And only Mrs. Cobb knew what he would do next.
Starting off is the 1972 exploitation film Invasion of the Blood Farmers. This is a movie I talked about on my channel about a year ago, and I said in my review that this is a movie that is not for everybody. It is a very, very bad movie. It is not good by any means necessarily, but if you're if you can like vibe with like Andy Milligan's films, or with like Ted V. Michaels movies, even Al Adamson's movies, and if you can genuinely sit down and enjoy Manos, the Hands of Fate, it's the kind of movie for you. Essentially, this is a movie about a group of crazed druids who are kidnapping and harvesting blood from people in this small town in order to resurrect their druid queen, who is in a dead/catatonic state. It's kind of like Blood Feast, except it's a lot worse than Blood Feast. Either way, this is a movie that is low on the list for obvious reasons. I'm not really that good of a movie, and while these are being ranked based on my personal enjoyment of them, I do really enjoy this movie. But there are a lot of other Hixploitation films out there that are more noteworthy that I've seen. So yeah.
The story of a trail of butchery so brutal that newspapers refused to print its horrifying details.
Up next on the list, we have the 1973 horror film Pigs, also known as Daddy's Deadly Darling, as well as, I think, like, Roadside Torture Shack, and probably my favorite alternate title for the movie, The Strange Love Exorcist, because, believe it or not, in order to cash in on The Exorcist, they shot an opening scene for the movie to where the main character is possessed by a demon and has an exorcism performed on her. And they re-released it after the success of The Exorcist in order to see if they can make a quick buck off it. That is something that happened with this movie that is more of a psychological horror film / thriller than anything else. Essentially about a woman who is on the run for some reason, and she happens upon this old man who owns a kind of diner in this small town, and he has pigs, and apparently, like years and years ago, the pigs escaped from their pen, and they ended up killing and eating somebody, and since then, he has had to kill people and feed them to the pigs, because the pigs now have a taste for human flesh. And this plays into what the main character is going through as well. It kind of relates to that. And yeah, Pigs is a pretty interesting little Hixploitation film. A movie I personally enjoy. I find a lot more enjoyment, and I find it more intriguing and entertaining to watch than I do, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In all honesty, you know, no, not trying to knock the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's a good movie and everything, but I just find this one a bit more enjoyable. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a lot more solid of a film.
When the horror becomes unbearable, it is too late to scream.
Up next, we have the only film Dan Aykroyd ever directed. That's right. Comedy legend Dan Aykroyd, his only film that he ever directed is a Hixploitation horror film. I'm talking about Nothing But Trouble. Now, this movie is listed in multiple different places as a comedy, which it is a horror comedy, definitely, but it's kind of like a cross between Beetlejuice and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, having to do with this crazed judge who, with the help of his crazy fucking family, they own this small town in, I think, like Pennsylvania. Maybe not Pennsylvania. I'm probably thinking of the fact that they call their town Vania, or Vakenvania, I think. Either way, when a group of characters that consists of like Chevy Chase and Demi Moore, when they end up getting pulled over in the town for running a stop sign, they end up at the mercy of the judge and his crazed family in their very funhouse-esque house. And there's a great scene involving a roller coaster that the family has that they use to execute people called Mr. Bone Stripper. And it does exactly that. It strips flesh right off of the bone. This movie is very bad and stupid, but very, very entertaining. And there's a moment in the film when none other than the Digital Underground, as in the rap group where Tupac got his start, they get captured by the fucking family, and they perform the song they perform same song. They perform a fucking song in the movie. It's absolutely fucking wild from beginning to end, and very, very, very entertaining. If you like absurdist humor and bad movies, I would definitely recommend Nothing But Trouble from 1991.
What happens to these people in Eaten Alive will give you the most chilling, terrifying 90 minutes you ever spent in a theater.
Up next, we have the Tobe Hooper classic, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. What can be said? What can be said about this movie? Yes, movie is a bit far down on the list. It isn't as high as some other people might rank it. I personally am not the biggest fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't think it's that scary or violent or necessarily entertaining of a movie, but it's definitely a classic in its own right, and it's a very important piece of not just horror culture or horror history, but the horror of American independent cinema is a very important movie. In that kind of film canon. So it's kind of, it's an important movie. Pretty much everybody's seen this movie at this point. But if you haven't, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a very, very simple movie that, was simple and to the point, and that is a very good thing for its time, because it was one of the first to do this kind of setup. Essentially, a group of, young people, teenagers, I would say teenagers, I guess. They're just driving around, and they pick up a hitchhiker, and this hitchhiker is like a fucking crazy dude, and they end up broken down, and they end up going to this house, and there's a crazy family in the house, and one of the members of the family wears masks made out of human skin and wields a chainsaw. Yeah. This is actually one of 3 Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies featured on this list. Keep that in mind.
Howdy, folks. You like blood, violence, freaks of nature?
Up next, we got what I'm pretty sure is, at least as far as my knowledge of the horror genre goes, The earliest Hixploitation horror film, 2000 Maniacs from 1964. This is Herschel Gordon Lewis's second splatter film, second entry in the Blood trilogy, and the film that he himself said when he dies he wanted to be remembered for. Herschel Gordon Lewis is one of my favorite directors. He wasn't necessarily a good filmmaker, but he made very entertaining movies, and I love his work to death. You know, I know a famous quote from him is, you know, I hesitate to call film an art, and I pity anybody who does. But at the same time, his movies are strangely art in a way. I don't know how to really put it, but essentially 2000 Maniacs is a movie about a group of people from the northern states. They are traveling and they end up going on a detour through this little town. And this little town invites them with, you know, free hotel rooms, food, any festivities and, you know, sources of entertainment, as part of their celebration of the anniversary of the end of the Civil War. But these people have have something a bit more sinister in mind than just in mind for these Northerners than, you know, one might think. And they start to kill these Northerners one by one in very ridiculous, over the top, but very entertaining ways, in order to, I guess, get revenge for the South losing the Civil War. It's, again, not necessarily a good movie. None of the movies featured on this list I would say are good movies necessarily, but this is a very enjoyable, charming, entertaining movie, and you can tell that there was a lot of heart and effort behind it, and yeah.
What they uncovered
You ain't seen nothing yet.
is the most horrifying and shocking tale of carnage ever seen.
Up next, we have a film directed by Charles Kaufman, and not the famous filmmaker Charles Kaufman. I'm talking about the founder of Troma, Lloyd Kaufman's brother, Charles Kaufman. I'm talking about Mother's Day. This movie is quite the film. It's a somewhat comedic kind of Hixploitation film about two brothers, two insane brothers who live in a house in the forest with their mother, and in order to entertain their mother, they kidnap and torture and rape women. This movie is pretty fucking wild. It's got some pretty decently violent moments. It's a pretty nasty little film overall, in complete honesty. It's got a wild-ass surprise ending that comes out of nowhere, and it's just thoroughly a very enjoyable slasher film, and definitely one of the better, definitely a very good kind of holiday-themed slasher film. This is one I watch pretty much on Mother's Day every year, because it is quite an enjoyable movie. I don't got much else to say about Mother's Day. It's a movie I enjoy quite a bit.
Some say she spoiled her boys. Some say she drove them mad. No one who found out has lived to tell.
Up next, we have the second Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie on this list. I'm talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. This movie is the only Texas Chainsaw Massacre film I own on Blu-ray. Let that say something about me as a horror fan, because I own almost all of them on DVD. I'm pretty sure I actually own all of them, other than like the prequel to the remake Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning. Other than like that one, I'm pretty sure I own pretty much all of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, and that's the only one I own on Blu-ray. Essentially, this movie is about Leatherface and his family yet again kidnapping these teenagers. This time it's on prom night, and progressively killing and torturing them and just fucking with them. But this one's very special because it features Matthew McConaughey as Leatherface's brother, who has a robotic leg that is controlled by TV remotes, and Leatherface is now transgender for some reason. Also, there's some kind of weird subplot that I don't want to spoil. But let me just say, it involves a character apologizing pretty much directly to the audience for how bad the movie is. What can I say? Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation is a very unique and special and different and entertaining movie, and it is probably my second favorite Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, in all honesty. Yeah.
Little do they know that out there something lies watching, waiting. Someone's coming. They're getting closer.
Up next we have Tourist Trap from 1979. This is a movie about a group of teenagers, young adults, who their car breaks down. They end up having to try and find help at this kind of roadside attraction of sorts, where two crazed hillbilly brothers, one of whom has telekinetic powers, proceed to pick them off one by one. The one with telekinetic powers using his abilities to make mannequins attack people. This movie is very atmospheric and creepy, despite it being very low budget and cheesy, and it's thoroughly enjoyable, and I don't got much else to say about it.
A mother fighting for her child loses it in the worst possible way.
Now we're on to the second of 3 Tobe Hooper movies that are on this list. I'm talking about Eaten Alive from 1976. Eaten Alive is Tobe Hooper's follow-up to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I like it more than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, mainly because instead of going for a very cinema verite, documentary style, fly-on-the-wall kind of filmmaking style that he did with the original film that he did with Texas Chainsaw, this one is very out there. It's got colorful lighting and heavy fog. It has almost a kind of nightmarish, otherworldly feel to it. And yeah, this movie is essentially about a guy who runs a motel in the middle of a swamp, and his motel is positioned right next to the swamp, and he has a pet alligator that he feeds people to for fun. This is a movie that exists, and it also features what's that guy's name? I can't remember the actual actor's name, but he was Winslow in Phantom of the Paradise, and he was also the magician in Funhouse, which is another Tobe Hooper movie. But yeah, this is a movie about a crazy guy who kills people and feeds them to his pet alligator. And also, Robert Englund has a small part in this movie, which is very, very cool to see young Robert Englund before he was Freddy.
The story of an American family who lost everything except the will to survive.
Up next, we have Video Violence from 1978. This is a shot-on-video film from the 80s. Technically, this film is set and shot in New Jersey, but 2 of the main killers in the movie are hillbillies, so I'm going to go ahead and count this as a Hixploitation film. This is a really cool shot-on-video film, easily one of the best shot-on-video films ever made, because it's actually a pretty interesting and gripping film. If this were remade on a bigger budget with a pretty good director, I would actually be very, very happy with that. But as is, it's just fine. Essentially, this is a movie about a town full of people, and they all rent movies from one video store, and they always rent horror films. Always. And, yeah, they rent horror films. And when somebody returns a blank tape that isn't a horror film to the store, They watch it, and it turns out to be a snuff film. And it turns out everybody in this town secretly makes their own snuff films and trades them around via the video store. That's the setup, and the movie turns into kind of a slasher mystery that has some pretty cool, violent gore effects.
Murdered, raped, burned, but not beaten. The story of one family's refusal to die.
Up next, we have Video Violence from 1978. This is a shot-on-video film from the 80s. Technically, this film is set and shot in New Jersey, but two of the main killers in the movie are hillbillies, so I'm going to go ahead and count this as an Hixploitation film. This is a really cool shot-on-video film, easily one of the best shot-on-video films ever made, because it's actually a pretty interesting and gripping film. If this were remade on like a bigger budget with a pretty good director, I would actually be very, very happy with that. But as is, it's just fine. Essentially, this is a movie about a town full of people, and they all rent movies from one video store, and they always rent horror films. Always. And, yeah, they rent horror films. And when somebody returns a blank tape that isn't a horror film to the store, they watch it, and it turns out to be a snuff film. And it turns out everybody in this town secretly makes their own snuff films and trades them around via the video store. That's the setup, and the movie turns into kind of a slasher mystery that has some pretty cool, violent gore effects.
A night of terror, a day of vengeance, where no one was spared. No one.
Kill the baby!
Up next, we have one of the only Rob Zombie movies that I think is actually a quality film. I'm talking about his first movie, House of a Thousand Corpses. I know everybody's always like, you know, what are you talking about? House of a Thousand Corpses sucks. The Devil's Rejects is far better. And I mean, The Devil's Rejects is a fine movie. Don't get me wrong. I like quite a few of Rob Zombie's movies, but I think that his only necessarily good one is House of a Thousand Corpses. Simple setup for this one, very similar to Texas Chainsaw. A group of, again, I'm going to go ahead and say young adults. They get, their car breaks down, they get a flat tire, and they receive help from a weird fucking family. And yeah, this weird family consists of, you know, quite a few horror icons, such as Karen Black and Bill Moseley. And this family turns out to be crazy. That's the setup. It's a movie set on Halloween, so it's a good movie to watch on Halloween. It's very weird and experimental and surreal at times. The last act, goddamn, the last act of the film is legit off the wall and crazy, and it's exactly what you want from a movie like this. So yeah, go ahead and check that one out if you haven't. It came out like 16 years ago now.
The most bizarre and brutal series of crimes in America.
Up next, we got a rather recent movie. This one is one that is kind of a Hixploitation film, kind of a Nazi-ploitation film. Gonna go ahead and count it as Hixploitation. Green Room from 2015. If you don't know about this one made big waves when it came out in 2015, 2016. It is essentially a very simple film setup. A group, a punk rock group, they perform at a neo-Nazi skinhead bar when their previous gig doesn't work out, and they end up witnessing a murder in the green room there, and they end up becoming essentially targets for this crazed neo-Nazi gang. And this movie is very violent. It is very breakneck paced, and I had the chance to see it in the theater, and it was quite the... God damn, what's up with my voice tonight? It is quite the film to see on the big screen. When I got home, when I got the Blu-ray and everything, and I watched it again, it was nowhere near as violent as I remembered it being, and I think that is something that attributes to the effect of seeing it in a big, dark room. But yeah, Green Room. It has Patrick Stewart in it as the leader of the neo-Nazis. That's something you gotta see.
He feeds those pigs. dead people, and then he eats the pigs.
Now we got another classic. This one is from Wes Craven. This was his, I think, second film, The Hills Have Eyes, which I have my, that's fucked. I have my Blu-ray copy signed by Dee Wallace and Michael Berryman. They were very nice. The Hills Have Eyes is an absolute classic movie, and it's a movie that I'm assuming most people have seen at this point. Either way, the remake is also really good, honestly. This family, they're going on a road trip, they go through the desert, and the guy who runs the gas station they stop at tells them, like, look, do not go on that side road, you know, I know you want to go up in those mountains and try to find diamonds or whatever, don't go on that side road. They go against his advice, and they go on that side road, and they end up breaking down, and then they are attacked by a gang of cannibal mutant hillbillies who live in the mountains, and yeah, that's essentially the gist of the movie. The sequel to it, The Hills Have Eyes Part 2, is a movie that gets a lot of hate, and is a movie that gets a lot of hate, and a lot of people say it's like the worst movie ever, but honestly, The Hills Have Eyes Part 2 is almost as good as the first one. So, you know what? Fuck it. The Hills Have Eyes Part 1 and 2 are my choice for the number 2 spot. Fuck it.
In the wake of this bizarre rampage, he vanished.
And at the number 1 spot, as if there was ever any doubt, especially if you have seen quite a few of my videos and you've seen my video about my favorite slasher films, number 1 spot for my favorite exploitation film is Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Go ahead and sue me. I love this movie. I love this movie with every fiber of my being. This is a movie I saw when I was very, very young. It was the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie I ever saw. I happened to catch a few scenes of it when I came home from school one day when I was in like the 4th grade. It was on TV, so it was cut, but the main things I remembered were the chili cook-off, where the woman finds a tooth in the chili, and I remember the scene where Dennis Hopper is running into the fucking amusement park, and he kicks down the wall, and all the, like, blood and meat kind of just falls out of the wall. Those are the 2 big things I remember, and I've been meaning to see it again for a very long time. And then when I was like 12, 13, 14 years old, I bought a copy of it for $5, and I fell in love with it, and it has been one of my favorite horror movies, one of my favorite movies of all time ever since. This one is not necessarily a simple setup. Essentially, Leatherface and his older brother, Chop Top, were portrayed by Bill Moseley, who was Otis in House of a Thousand Corpses. They kill some yuppies who are driving as these yuppies are calling a radio station over the phone. The radio station happens to record and get a tape of the call and of the murder being committed. In order to draw out the killers, the Dennis Hopper character, Lefty, convinces the DJ character, Stretch, to play the tape on the air, and she does, and then Leatherface and his brother Chop Top come for her. Something I love about this movie is that Leatherface in this movie kills one person, I think. He doesn't kill that many people. In fact, his older brother kills more people than he does. And that's something that's very interesting about the movie. Another thing is that in this movie, like, Leatherface kind of hits puberty in a way. He kind of falls in love with the main character in a weird way. It's bizarre. And it's very, very out there and ridiculous. There's colored lighting, there's smoke machines, there is a fucking metal plate in his head Vietnam veteran hippie who is scratching at it with a fucking wire hanger, and just given these great fucking one-liners like "lick my plate, you dog dick." It's such a fucking amazing movie, and you know, watching it after seeing the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, it is like night and day, and it's very similar to the differences between House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects, with House of a Thousand Corpses being off the wall, crazy, colorful, weird as fuck, and the sequel being a lot more grounded and normal. It's very similar to the situation when comparing the first and second Texas Chainsaw to each other, and for those reasons alone, like, I think if I would have seen this movie after seeing Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first one, you know, if I saw the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre when I was a kid, I probably would like the original more. But because I saw Texas Chainsaw 2 first, I actually prefer that one to the first one quite a bit. And I think it's a lot more entertaining and enjoyable and fun and nightmarish. You know, I often hear the phrase "a nightmare on film" used when talking about particularly frightening movies. But the thing is, when I have a nightmare, it's not something that's necessarily realistic. It's always something that's really ridiculous and stupid, that in the moment of having the dream, it's horrifying, but when you wake up the next morning, it's not scary at all. I'm laughing my ass off because I was having a fucking panic attack in my sleep over a nightmare where zombies attacked me and my dog, and then I was saved by a giant inflatable shark. I'm not joking. This is a nightmare I had once, and it's fucking ridiculous that this would scare me. And actually, and in my dream too, the shark scared me more than the zombies. And that's just an example of like how my nightmares personally work. So I use nightmare on film to describe films that are equally weird and funny and stupid, as well as horrifying. Movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is a great example. Movies like Eraserhead, Mother, The Killing of a Sacred Deer, hell, I'll even say The Lobster if you want to go that far. Even Dogtooth, pretty much any Yorgos Lanthimos film, and a couple of David Lynch movies here and there. But yeah, that's it. That is it for this one. For this top 15 list, my number one is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and it always will be. Either way, if you watched it this far, I thank you guys. You know, as always, Biscuit Boo Horror Reviews signing off. Peace.